Welcome to Ever Beyond,
broadcast through the Wolf Spirit Media Network.
Be prepared to leave your belief systems behind as we go beyond teachers, beyond gurus, beyond duality, ever beyond.
Please join us in the chat room at www.wolfspiritradio.com/listen. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
Yes, indeed. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio. It's the 20th of August, 11 p.m. UK time. Here we are going around midnight, 3 Pacific, and God knows what in New Zealand. Let me know, Stone, if you're listening. Tonight, my guest recently approached me through Facebook and other media, and I had to listen to his stuff, and it's very interesting. So I hope that you'll find David quite interesting as well. A fellow countryman, although you're well-travelled, coming from and anyway, yeah. So I listened to his conversation with Kerry Cassidy earlier on, and there were lots of points of contact, and I thought, oh well, yeah, I know Colchester, Essex University and all that stuff, and so there's and also Oxford and various other places that you mentioned. So I'd like to welcome tonight. My guest is David Curtis. Good evening, David. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, JP. Fine.
Are you holding up? It's quite late here in Britain, and I know I'm a night owl, but not everybody else is.
No, I usually go to bed at 10 o'clock.
Oh my gosh. So we're well past your bedtime. Let's hope there's no punishment on the other side.
No, I'm wide awake.
Fabulous. So, most of our audience are wide awake and awakening. Many have had spiritual experiences, if not ET experiences, or in fact being ETs themselves. You never know these days. And we've got some Scots as well. So we got quite a good British audience as well as international audience. You've spoken about, in this interview, you spoke about many things. Why don't you introduce yourself briefly so that we can move on? And also, if there's any questions in the chat room, if you put them up in capital letters, press the caps lock and type it so that I can see it with my little beady eyes. Let's hope let's go for an interesting wander through the various planes. Good evening, David Curtis.
Right, okay, I'll give us a biographical sketch, and I won't go into my experiences, I'll just give a straight biographical sketch. Right, so I was born March the 1st, 1945, in the borough of Salford, Greater Manchester, in a district called Pendleton, and Pendle is known for witchcraft, so there's Pendle Hill, just north of Salford, and the witches were tried in Lancaster Castle, and I ended up much later living at the bottom of the hill of the castle, and I can talk about an amazing synchronicity that took place in a photographic cafe next to the castle. So I moved from Salford to Oxford, and at the age of 2, at the age of 15, I moved to America, to New England, to Portsmouth, and joined my sister, and I live in the housing project of an Air Force base, which is very important because at that time there was the investigation of the major abduction case in UFO history, the Betty and Barney Hill, was taking place when I was actually working in the base itself. And I moved from there to New York. I go to Poughkeepsie, which is on the Hudson River, about 50 miles north of New York City. And I attend high school. I then go to Stony Brook University, or the New York State University of Stony Brook, Long Island, which is an extension of Manhattan. And I drop out. I'm a typical dropout, but I'm not part of the counterculture, but I drop out. I then attend New Paltz State University near Woodstock, where the festival was, and I decide, after being in America from 61 to 69, to return to Banbury near Oxford. And so I come back, I get involved with people interested in Arthurian legend, and eventually I end up as a kind of follower of Krishnamurti. So through the 70s, I'm more or less a follower of Krishnamurti. And then 1980, I start to have these massive synchronicities, a whole nexus and thing of synchronicities. I keep a journal, and things that I write, such as plays, actually come true. So a whole play will come true. And I end up living in Soho, London, and with a friend who's now a professor in Jungian studies, and he's probably the most he's probably the most important world scholar on Jung and synchronicity. He lives nearby. The University of Essex is just down the road, and so we're constantly in conversation. And in about 1989, I live in the Institute for Psychophysical Research with Celia Green, and she coined the term lucid dream, and she wrote a book called Lucid Dreaming, and she was a specialist in out of the body. And I go with my friend to Lancaster, and he gets his PhD at Lancaster University, and writes a book on Jung and the paranormal and synchronicity. And then we moved to Colchester, and that was in 1997. So I've been here for 20 years, and during that time I've written 9 books, and I've just published them. And once I published them, March the 1st on my birthday, I approached various people like yourself, and that's where I am now. I've just been through a series of interviews, and this is my situation. So that's kind of like a quick survey.
Excellent. So here we are, and so you're still in Colchester, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Colchester. I live. Colchester's built on a hill. It's a kind of ridge, and at the south, at the eastern side of the ridge is Colchester Castle. Colchester Castle was the biggest castle that the Normans ever built in Western Europe, and it's the twin of the Tower of London, which is built on the White Mount, and that's where the head of Bran, the Celtic Bran, the Raven, that's where his head was. Well, his head was a kind of cauldron of oracular cauldron. But anyway, the Tower of London's a twin. It was the same ground plan. And and now the castle is a museum, and it houses Celtic, Roman and medieval artifacts. And in fact, the Roman collection in the castle is the largest collection in situ. In other words, it has the largest local collection. You know, all the stuff has been dug up. And my house, I'm living in a flat, but the house itself was originally in the grounds of the castle. And just down the road is the Roman circus, a kind of theatre. So it's kind of, and also that Colchester is the oldest town in England as well.
That's right. A delightful place it is too. And,
Yeah.
And so, there's location. Now, I can't actually hear myself. I think, just try to plug my, never mind. Yeah, there we go. I can hear myself now. Anyway, so, what was interesting is this, well, what interests me in Ever Beyond and the conversations that I have is usually about the awakening process, because
Right.
a lot of people are awakening right now, and they don't really know what's going on.
Right.
And there are a few people who have taken various initiation steps towards being woke, towards waking up fully to being the ascended human. Okay.
Okay.
And part of this is the ability to receive messages from the other worlds, the other parts of us, where these other dimensional existences that we have, that we're taught carry continually and concurrently with our present lives, and it's the process seems to be about building bridges and building communication between those things. And so I was very, very fascinated when you were saying, I mean, it was, for you, it was a formidable process, it seems, because, well, of what you did. So would you like to tell my audience the story of the plays that you wrote?
Right. Okay. So I'm a hippie in America. I'm part of it. I drop out of college. I was very bourgeois. I didn't know about the counterculture, and I attended the Jimi Hendrix experience in the university. He came to the university, and I end up living in Newport near Woodstock, and I'm right in the center of the hippie culture. So Ken Kesey, Magical Mystery Tour, they all come over and to the East Coast from California, and I took some LSD and took hashish and various things, but I'd already awakened a year or so before without any knowledge of spirituality. I wasn't brought up in a religious household. I knew nothing about the soul or anything like that. And so anyway, so I'm a hippie more or less. I'm squatting in London, I'm squatting in Wales, I'm living in communes. That's my lifestyle. No property, no money. And I'm artistic, I'm poetic, and I'm not really reading books or anything like that. And then in about 1978, so 10 years later, I decide more or less not to be a hippie. I cut my long beard, I cut my hair, I start wearing, fairly middle class clothes, and and I find I'm living with my mother because she's just got a house and she's putting me up for a while. So anyway, I decide to look for a room. I go to this religious place, but and they give me a room in the place called Commonwealth House, which means that people from all over the world come and stay there and do their degrees and things in Oxford. And there's a cafe on the corner, which a kind of cafe bookshop belonging to St. Aldate's Church. Well, St. Aldate's Church, my nephew was the head choir boy there when he was much younger. And, I go to the cafe and I thought, wow, it would be really nice to live next door. I could pop into the cafe. I think the poet Auden used to go there and things like, because across the road was Christchurch College. And that's where he ended up actually living there. And he used to wander around in his kind of house slippers and things like that. But anyway, so I go to this place and they recommend going to Pembroke Street, where the cafe is and such, and I actually end up living in the very house that I wanted to live in. So I'm there, and I start to write plays. I start to write these plays, and I wrote a play about a couple, and they have a breakup, and it is quite a complicated story, but within a year or so, I meet all the people, all the characters in the actual play turn out to be true, and they live in North Oxford, which is where all the professors and dons, but most especially in a place called Jericho, which is a kind of alternative. They have the Phoenix Theatre and various things, kind of alternative community. And I do meet the couple that are just broken up, and I meet my best friend through that. And that I would say is quite typical of my life. I seem to, for instance, I did a painting of two figures in about 1994 when I was in Lancaster, and when I moved here, only about a year ago, I went to bed, and when I lie down, I have all these visitations. So I've had hundreds of shades from Hades, the Greek Hades, all dressed in grey. So there's like hundreds of shades waiting, I suppose, by the River Styx to go across the River Styx in the ferry. So I've had hundreds. I have dolphins swimming around the room, huge dolphins swimming around the room, that kind of thing. But anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I might wake up and not open my eyes, but this time I just opened my eyes. I saw two figures, full-size figures near the door, and as soon as my eyes made contact with them, they just went through the door. And these figures were identical to the pictures I actually drew about 20 years before. Now, the pictures I drew, I gave human features, but actually these figures were actually, they had a round head with nothing in it, just a circle, and they had a kind of a rectangular body which kind of flared at the bottom. And then in my researches in ancient Egypt, I found those exact figures in one of the Book of the Dead.
Are they called something like Manjus or something? There's, I think they also have them in Australia. Is that right? Very much a kind of almost like a Casper the Ghost kind of figure, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the point is in ancient Egypt, the circle is actually a solar. So what they're doing is these entities with the circle, which represents the solar element, they're pulling the sunbow with Ra. Ra is standing in the sunbow, and they're pulling him from the west to the east, so he can be reborn. So they're actually, if you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there are 12 hours of the night, and there are 12 portals, there are 12 doors, and the sun hero Horus has to navigate through the 12 doors, which are the 12 portals, and the only way you can go through each of the doors is to get help from Thoth or Isis. They're the kind of sorcerers of the underworld. They're the kind of moon deities, and you have to receive the words of power. So that means you have to decode each of the gods. But the gods, it's not a matter of, just reading the Book of the Dead. Those gods have to be revealed to you. You have to have, so those entities, you might say, represent Ra, and they were revealing themselves to me so I could integrate them into my own system. But it's no good just looking at the book and just, thinking about them. You've got to, they have to be real living entities in your life. So you go through the 12 hours of the night, and then you come out at the other end. Now, as you approach the other end, the light at the end of the tunnel, as it were, in the near-death experience or whatever, the light at the end of the tunnel is actually the morning star. And at the end of Revelations in the Bible, in the last chapter, I think 21, and Jesus said that he is of the root of David and the morning star. And in Revelation 2, he says that if you overcome the sorceress, the prophetess Jezebel, who's under the influence of Satan, he'll give you the morning star. So the mornings, and when the Buddha was actually sitting under the Bodhi tree, the god of evil approached him, Mara, and he had to deal with Mara, and then the Naga, who's the initiate of wisdom, the Naga is the serpent kings that were the aboriginal serpent kings of India before the Hindus and before the Aryans. They were the kind of very ancient, and their presence at the Bodhi tree shows that the Buddha was an initiate of the dragon cult, which is universal. I mean, that in Egypt, Osiris is the eternal king in Draco, the dragon, and his son is Horus. So when the Buddha went into deep meditation after a life review, he had to go through his past lives. He had to have a life review, and in the morning he sees the morning star. So the morning star is very typical. That appears. So when you enter the underworld in the West, you go into the tail of a serpent, and you navigate through the body of the serpent, and through the 12 hours of the night, and then you come out, and you come out of the head in the east, and when you come out, you're known as Ra Horakti, which is the east-facing Sphinx. So you're identified with the Sphinx, and you're the sun god or the sun deity or Horus on the horizon, and then you ascend up the steps of the step pyramid through the planetary houses, and then as the sun god you step aboard the sun boat, which is the seventh step. So the seventh step isn't actually attached to the pyramid. This is the original step pyramid, and there's the sun boat, and then you step aboard the sun boat and it takes you to the seventh heaven.
Well, that's very interesting, because the theme tune to my show is a track I made several years ago, and it's called 7 Steps to Heaven. Just want to get that one in there. So yes, more synchronicities. Keep going.
Yeah, well, one of my books is The 7 Steps of Wisdom, and it's based on my study of the step pyramid, which was said to be the first of the pyramids. And I'm not going to dispute the fact that, people that believe in Giza and that it was after the Ice Age and the Sphinx, I don't know about that. But I just stick to the records and stick to the authentic texts. And anyway, a person called Imhotep, Hetep, which means one who comes in peace, he was actually the one that he was the architect of the step pyramid, and he built it for his father, King Zoser, and that was in 2650 BC, and anyway, I studied that, and that's what I based my book on, The 7 Steps of Wisdom.
There you go. So 7 steps are interesting. Because I mean, like yourself, there are things that you come up with that you think, that's just random words stuck together, and then somebody comes along and says, "Habidabdaba," and you go, "Oh, really? Habidabdaba? That's interesting." As an example word.
Did you say abracadabra?
It was just a bunch of burbling sounds that almost sounded like habit. Yeah, but that kind of thing is like a random sequence of words and things that you think are completely mad, and then somebody comes back and says, yeah, it's a thing. It's a real thing that you're talking about. And I'm finding a lot of people are doing this. I used to get words, I would wake up in the morning when the last thing in my dream was this one word or something like that. Get them on specific dates, like my 30th birthday and stuff like that. But the conversation between the subconscious and the conscious is something that the relationship to it in humans is changing. Would you like to speak on that? Because this is like something Jung touched on 100 years ago, and now we're talking about it in our daily lives. Experiencing.
Could you be more?
Well, I'm talking about the way that what you call the magical life, or the life of synchronicity, the spiritual life, the life of a naturally evolved person.
Yeah, I can talk about the actual, if you like, the kind of structure, as he put it over. And I was saying that you had to he said when you people go into therapy, for example, but they're kind of, you might say, attempting to integrate very fragmented experiences and traumas and all that kind of Freudian stuff. And very few people, he says, continue to deepen into individuation. They stop and they go and they conform to society again. But once you start the process of individuation, it becomes more and more difficult to believe in society, believe in belief systems, believe in traditions. And a lot of people who were followers of Jung went through the process in Zurich where he lived. I mean, they remained there all their life. They just couldn't cope with the greater world. And unfortunately, the Jungian community, if you approach it as I try to approach it with my books, I've written a book, a biography of Jung called Jung Avatar, about his visions in his autobiography. They don't want to know. They more or less turn their backs on me. Or I've sent things to America, all over the place. And my friend, as I said, is a world scholar on Jung and synchronicity. I mean, he doesn't want to read my work either. I mean, he won't touch UFOs or anything like that. They're a very isolated community. But anyway, if you take the process of individuation, once you begin that journey, he calls that the symbolic life, right? So that means that something has to happen in your life to begin the kind of seed of individuation, which is you have to have an awareness of yourself in distinction from your identity, right? So if you're, say, a father, if you're a father or you're a priest or you're, a policeman, right, you take off your uniform and you're sitting in the kitchen having a cup of coffee, you know very well that you're not the policeman. But you don't then say, well, I'm interested in individuation, about the individuation of the self. No, you don't do that. You just put back on the uniform and go out. But so something has to intervene in your life to make you aware that the self, spiritually speaking, is very important, and not to confuse that with identification or projection. So the point is that I can give my first sense of awakening, if you like, that happened to me, that put me on that path. I mean, I can say that, if you like.
That's always the bit, because it's always individual, and yet it follows certain tendencies. And it's not always recognizable. as something, sometimes it might be, motorcycle accident. Sometimes it might be, near terminal disease or something like that. Something life-threatening, a near-death experience. But in every way, it does something to the psyche which kind of starts to crack. And like the crack of an egg, it starts in one tiny place where the little beak is tapping and tapping and tapping. So something inside has already started tapping. And there comes a point. So for you, David, what was your point?
Right. What I would say is that if you're in a room, if you're sitting in a room and you see, for instance, say, a peacock butterfly. So the peacock butterfly is flying about and you go to the window, you're looking out and it comes towards you. Now that can just be a random thing, you think nothing of it. But if you can connect that, if you have something you can connect that to, that something you connect that to is important, right? So there's something in you, something's happened to you, and then you begin to connect it. It might be a place, it might be a book, it might be a flower, it might be, UFO or whatever. But I think there's got to be, something's got to happen. It's pointing something out. There's the kind of normal fabric of consciousness, and then something else is there, like a light in the sky, that kind of thing. I think it has to be something you can know. You've got to make it your own. It's got, so the self, as it were, yourself, comes in contact with something spiritual that's been revealed to you. You may, like me, I wasn't religious, so I didn't know. I was in Poughkeepsie and dropped out of college and went back there, and I was married and I broke off my marriage and had a girlfriend and all of that. And suddenly, more or less suddenly, the world changed, right? The world around me changed so that there was a consciousness shift, and the city that was quite normal to me, suddenly it wasn't normal. The city wasn't normal. So this wasn't a kind of specific experience, but it was actually a shift in consciousness. I didn't know what it was. In fact, I thought there was something wrong. I actually thought there was something wrong. So I had a friend, and his father was a psychiatrist, and I went to their house and had a chat, and he was saying this and that. And so anyway, I thought there was something wrong, wrong with my brain or something. And then then the process started to reveal itself, and I started to meet what I called strange people. I was very bourgeois, and I started to, connect, one might say, with the world around me in a radically different way, with the kind of people I was meeting and things and the books that were given to me. It was like a life all around me suddenly became awake. And these things, whether you call it synchronistic or whatever, symbolic, they were coming in, and it just escalated within a few months. It's like I went from the shallow end to the deep end, and that's what happened to me, that I've never been the same since.
Now, it's very interesting because I have a friend here. We call him Tree Paul. And essentially, he sounds like one phase of your life. He sometimes lives in a caravan, most of the time living in his car, traveling around, planting trees, doing stuff. But he was in the Air Force, and he was like a trainee glider fighter pilot or something like that. Anyway, he went to a Barclay James Harvest concert and was never the same again. I believe that you went to a concert and was never the same again. We wonder about art changing lives. It certainly does. And, for me, it was, and what was really another synchronicity is last night I was at my friend's house and, he had his Dansette. Now, do you know what a Dansette, record player is? It's an old 1960s record player, the ones that the album drops onto the platter and the little automatic thing and the needle comes down. Anyway, he only had half a dozen jazz records and I looked through them and said, this one, Soft Machine, Mike Ratledge. and there we are, and we're listening to the show this afternoon. There you're talking about you go to see a Soft Machine and Jimi Hendrix concert. Tell us about that.
Yes, I come out of high school. I'm living with, when I went to America, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to join my sister, she and her husband more or less abandoned me. I was 15 years of age and I had to look after myself. I was in high school. So I literally had to ask people to look after me. And so anyway, I end up in New York and leave high school and work in IBM for the summer. And I actually worked on the Apollo rocket, just doing kind of working on modules and various things, quite simple. And I decided to go to Stony Brook University. And when I was there, the Jimi Hendrix Experience came on, and before then the Soft Machine. So I walk in, and I was into classical music. I walk in the Soft Machine, kind of jazz fusion type of thing, and then the Jimi Hendrix. And I was very moved by his music. So I got into him and the Grateful Dead and people like that. And Kerry Cassidy on the Project Camelot, she suggested that this was prior to my awakening. She suggested that was one of the triggers.
That's very awesome.
I didn't know anything about Jimi Hendrix, but I know he made records about Voodoo Child and all kinds of magical UFO, all that stuff. I didn't really know that. I didn't know anything about the counterculture, rock music, or anything like that. So that could have been a trigger. So that means that if the music is coded in a certain way, and there is this idea, isn't there, that the whole psychedelic revolution was masterminded by people like Aldous Huxley.
I think that there were competing factions that were operating at that time, and that there's what they call white hats and dark hats, both working. And working in and through these people, like Hendrix, I believe was quite a high dimensional being. And lots of people agree, that there was something otherworldly about him. And when we go to the break, I'm going to be putting on Third Stone from the Sun, which is one of the first. Okay, so again. When I was a kid, right, I had a little Dansette. That's all I had. And my sister left me, I think, 4 records. And the one that fascinated me the most was Are You Experienced? By, so I was 6 at the time or something. Anyway, but, this, and the track was called Third Stone from the Sun. So we're going to be, listening to that later on. But the idea that Hendrix was bringing through, as you say, encoded through his vibration, it was so brash, it was so clear, it was so pronounced. Nothing like it has ever hit the planet, in some ways.
No, so what do you think, conspiracy theory is very complex, and there is this idea that I met Timothy Leary in New York. I went to his house and everything. The point is that evidently Timothy Leary, McKenna, psychedelic guru, and people like that in California, that they were in the Doors, and they, their parents were military, and there was an intelligence. My view is that although there may be negative connotations, my view is that I've said recently to a friend that I think on this planet Earth, I think the 60s, I think we were the freest in that period, maybe continuing now into the age of Aquarius. It's we, the types of people we should be grateful, because I think we are the freest people ever.
In terms of, we're beginning. I mean, well, there is a small amount of but that amount is growing.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, you in the past you had pockets of people like the Bohemians, in the early part of the century. You had the Romantics, you had the Renaissance revival with Bruno and all of that. You had the alchemists. There were very, very small groups of people, because the society they lived in would have persecuted them, and like Bruno burnt at the stake. So those people were always in fear of their life, like the UFO community.
I see what you're saying, yes.
So I'm saying that if you go back in history, you got the philosophers of ancient Greece. Again, a small group of people, Pythagoras. There were little groups of people, and they managed to survive. And then you had the initiates of ancient Egypt, etc. What Steiner said, what Rudolf Steiner, I studied him quite deeply, what Rudolf Steiner said was that, he was into theosophy, anthroposophy, and theosophists talk about rounds, the different rounds. And they said that the round, that I think it's the 5th round, was going to take place in California. The 5th round was going to take place in California. The theosophists, Blavatsky and Olcott, they set up the Theosophy Society in 1875. But they were followed by Annie Besant and Ledbetter, and they selected this young man in India called Krishnamurti and brought him to England to become the coming Buddha, the Bodhisattva Maitreya. Well, in his late 20s, Krishnamurti abandoned the Theosophists and actually settled in Ojai in California. He became friends with Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian Huxley, in England, was part of the eugenics movement. Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception, based on William Blake, took mescaline, etc., etc. And so this idea of the 5th round, beginning in which actually has its roots in ancient Egypt. So there are various, like the Celts, the Egyptians, and the Germans. And so you've got this idea of evolution, of races, of people, etc. And then the whole point of Krishnamurti ending up in California, having his experiences that place him in the context of the Maitreya, and at the end of his life, he died in 1986, at the end of his life, and I knew I was in the not quite in the inner circle, but I was deeply into that whole thing. And I shared experiences with him. I had transcendental experiences with him. And in California, he set up a school, but the whole point is this, that things don't happen out of the blue. I mean, if you talk about history, you talk about, say, Shakespeare, something's going on behind the scenes, behind closed doors, sub rosa, and things are going on, like the aliens are, I think, like the alien and AI and all of that. So there's always there's layers. So things just don't happen like the psychedelic revolution. Things are going on. And so you've got the theosophists, the round of the evolutionary round of certain types of people that are going to carry the initiation process forward. You've got Krishnamurti and Ojai, you've got Timothy Leary, you've got all these L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology, you've got the psychedelic revolution. It's all going on in California. So obviously, and Crowley and all these people like that, it all goes back to like Blavatsky, for example. So you can follow the trail back to Blavatsky, basically, and she was born in about 1830. And so it goes back quite deep. And
yeah, this stuff has been going on for quite a while.
So I'm saying layers and layers, and there are people pulling the strings. There are actually puppet masters pulling the strings. But what I'm suggesting, what Steiner said, he said that while he was an anthroposophist, he said that our generation, what I'm saying is the kind of hippie, the modern bohemian, the modern outsider, the modern initiate, so to speak, that there's more. I think he's more or less saying that we're all incarnating now. That we're all here now. If you take, for example, if you go back to ancient Egypt 5,000 years ago, so that means the initiates, the pockets of people that were initiates or took spirituality seriously are all incarnating now. That's what he said.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, certainly there is a gathering of the initiate groups, because that's what I'm here for, and it's a long-term plan. And a lot have been pulled off and distracted from the path.
Yeah, but if things, like trees, aren't they? They're kind of part of the system, so it's inevitable that nature continues. It's inevitable because the universe is infinite. So it's a kind of inevitability that bohemians, outsiders, initiates, they keep on recurring, and the point is, if you look at the New Age and the Age of Aquarius, and what is our mission? What are we trying to do? The New World Order. Is it to become extraterrestrial? Is our scientific destination? Is it to become transcendental, which is our religious destination, or is it something? A synthesis of those two things. I think the UFO being the archetype of the self in Jungian terms, which is the Holy Grail. So the circle, the mandala, it is actually the Holy Grail. It's the sun disk. It's the UFO. So he's saying the modern myth appears at this time as a symbol of wholeness, of holiness. And, we serve the Grail. If we serve the Grail, and therefore that means if we serve the Sangreal, then we are of that bloodline. And if you take the bloodline, like the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and you take it back through the Merovingians, and then you go back to David, Solomon, Jesus, and going back there. So the point is that it's in our blood. And we're kind of vehicles, as the Theosophists say, we're vehicles. The Bodhisattva Maitreya is really the vehicle of love. So the Tibetan Buddhists see the principle of love in the Bodhisattva Maitreya as a symbol of what we need. We need that factor of love. And then if you look at it platonically, what is love, then that is, something to contemplate. It's not given to you. You have to work it out, what love is. And I think that's the most important thing I can see at the moment.
So, I think at this moment, we could take a break. Don't you? And, as previously mentioned, from Jimi Hendrix, from Are You Experienced, my first ever album. Thank you very much, Linda. That's my sister. She left them. Jimi Hendrix, The Third Stone from the Sun. As our ship comes into a landing, welcome back to The Third Stone from the Sun. This is Ever Beyond on Wolf Spirit Radio. Tonight's guest, it's the 21st, well, it's now the 21st of August, it's the 20th of August, 2017. Tonight's guest is David Curtis. So there you go. I hope that didn't bring too many flashbacks to you.
No, I don't really know that particular track very well.
Oh, I see. It's from it's very early on. As you can hear, it definitely went into the jazz zone. My favorite bit is when there's all this chaos and very slowly the main theme comes echoing back, and coming back in for the final landing. Anyway, so, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know who the child of chaos is Saturn. Saturn is the child of chaos.
I see.
So I was just thinking of fractals, coming out and patterns coming out, and out of the chaos is Saturn. And Saturn is related to, according, I think, to Jordan Maxwell, is Satan, and Satan is Set.
And just about every symbol is a Saturn symbol, from the circle with the line across it to the Nike symbol. They all represent Saturn and its rings.
Right. So where would you like to begin now?
So, hour 2, octave 2. My show, the title I gave my show was the Dark Night Before the Dawn. And specifically, there does seem to be in the air some element of change, some momentous change. Something is very, very imminent. Now, it may be really good, may be really not so good. Both ways, it's a change. And it really feels at this moment that we're in a very quiet place. It's like everything's holding its breath, waiting for whatever's going to happen. And this moment they have called, and Jung has spoken about it as well, as the dark night of the soul.
Right.
Or the long dark night of the soul. Or the long dark afternoon of the soul. But, the whole, element of anticipation seems to be in the air at this moment.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak about that from whatever perspective you like?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an anonymous text, I think it's a medieval anonymous text called The Cloud of Unknowing. And the cloud motif is, in Tibetan Buddhism, you have the incarnate body, and the Nirmanakaya, the incarnate body, and then which is fertilized by the rain, which is coming from the clouds, and the clouds are illuminated by the sun, which is, say, in nirvana, you have the sun, and the sun shines, and the clouds and the rain. Then you have the rainbow. So I know the rainbow, David Wilcox goes on about ascension, the ascension, the rainbow body in Tibet. And of course you've got the famous rainbow above the ark with Noah, which is a kind of covenant between God than the earth. So the Lord says that, no more will he trouble the earth. There's a covenant. So the cloud is, you might say, is, if you look in terms of ascension from the body through the psyche, so the cloud is, you might say blocking. One might say blocking or thwarting the vision. So you want a vision, a new vision. You want to revision, say, the earth. You want to revision the earth. And of course you've got the idea of the new world order. And you've got the idea of, as I was saying earlier, about the round. You've got this generation. What is the purpose of this generation? And some people are interested in Jung, synchronicity, some people are interested in magic and so forth. So someone like David Wilcox is trying to integrate all these levels. He's speculating about the cosmos holographically, and everybody's trying to get a vision of what the whole is, in other words, try to integrate the fragments, try to get what is the puzzle? You've got pieces of the puzzle. I feel I'm in a position, I'm trying to find my place within, say, the UFO structure, because I've had a number of UFO encounters. And Jung said the UFO was the modern myth of the 21st century, the age of technology, the age of Aquarius, and it symbolizes wholeness. So we're seeing the symbol of wholeness, and it's very elusive. It's not really, it's tangible to a degree, but as you were saying earlier about bridges, and the rainbow bridge. So the visionary, to revision, to have a vision, you could say is to have a rainbow bridge. So that's what I would say at the moment, is that for me personally, after 50 years of investigation, and I've kind of closed the book on that period of my life, which is book knowledge, you might say book knowledge. So I have experiences, I interpret the experience and put them in a book. Now I'm trying to live in the world without the book. And so I'm talking to you, I'm meeting people, and they're telling me their stories, and I'm trying to kind of integrate myself into the community. So I'm trying to find the right bridge. I'm trying to find the right language, so that I can talk to you, I could talk to Kerry Cassidy, I could talk to somebody else, or Simon Parkes, or whoever the people are. And yes, you may believe in Jung, synchronicity, UFOs, but I haven't come to that conclusion. I don't quite know what the form is. I don't know quite what the end, what the puzzle will look like. So that's what I feel. I am in the clouds. I am kind of trying to revision my life. And I've got all these pieces, and they are only pieces. I mean, they are only symbols. I mean, even though you experience the UFO, it's kind of left you with an image. And people have so many different images of the UFO, the images of entities, and so forth. I've had reptilian entities. I've had kind of solar entity with a golden mask that appeared to me in a dream, and so, as I say, if you think of what's the picture, the bigger picture, what is the picture in 50 years? I mean, I don't know what that picture is in 50 years, but I think that, that you and I trying to kind of clarify things is important. You know, even though we're speaking ourselves in fragments, there's a kind of continuity, there's a kind of, sympathy or a kind of understanding that I suppose we take for granted, that we have a certain understanding we take for granted. And that isn't the same as saying, I believe it, you believe in UFO, I believe in UFO. Something quite different. It's a kind of understanding of a journey, or, the place we have in history and what we're actually intending to do right now, that kind of thing. I think there is a non-verbal understanding that we need to work together. So that's where I am at the moment.
So, coming out of the cave, as it were.
Yeah.
And, I think there's been a lot of people who have been, in that same kind of zone. And now it's time really to come out and, externalize. Because, it's time for the externalization of the soul groups and, the realization that it doesn't matter, you may be, a banker or that's no, yes, okay, you may be anywhere from all walks of life, all kinds of rank, but everybody's equal in the level of evolution that they are, and everybody's just playing their roles out as well as they can. But within that group of people who are just being normal people, they're a group of very, very wise and ancient souls, very sensitive, very empathic, and a lot of them were monks and nuns in previous lives, in the Himalayas, in various monasteries all around the world. But in addition to being very, very sensitive, they have a great deal of influential energy that can ripple out.
Yeah. I feel.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I feel very identified with the Aboriginal. I feel quite close to the Aboriginal. I'm very much a nature person, and I like walking, and just tuning into nature. I mean, that's quite an important thing for me personally. And I'm also very cultural. I'm educated in the West and all of that, sophisticated. But really, I wear kind of middle class, upper middle class clothes. But in fact, in the days when I was kind of more ethnic and beatnik, and I kind of liked that. But for various reasons in Oxford, and I was mixing with university people, I became more or less on the outside like them. But in fact, in my house, where I am now, I'm very kind of Aboriginal. I don't know, do you know Lawrence van der Post? Have you heard of him?
I've heard of him. I don't think I've heard him.
No, he's a friend.
I know Lawrence Gardner.
No, right. Bloodline of the Holy Grail. No, Lawrence van der Post was a friend of Jung, and he wrote a book called Mantis. Now, Mantis is really prophet, means prophet. But what happened to him? He was in New York City, and met these. Obviously he's quite influential people, and he met influential people in New York, probably Upper Side, Central Park. And anyway, he goes to this flat, or he goes to this apartment, and this couple, very sophisticated and all of that. And in walks this bushman from the Kalahari Desert in Africa. And Lauren van der Post, I mean, he wrote books on travelling in the Kalahari with the Bushmen, and he wrote the definitive books on the Bushmen and their kind of habits and beliefs and everything like that. So in walks this Bushman in the middle of New York in a very sophisticated thing and sits down and just smokes this cigar, and he just like watches him smoking, absolutely in love with this cigar. And of course the pipe, smoking the pipe was like very important to the Bushmen. You know, so that's what I'm saying, you know, that underneath we making contact with the Aboriginal, I think is quite an important experience. That's what I feel.
So, I'm reminded of the Hopi prophecy where where they basically said, well, everybody's going to be like us really, in the end. People will grow their hair, wear clothes, dress like us, and behave like us. That's their prophecy. So that's always quite interesting. I always love the Hopi prophecies. But well, apart from the planetary reversal one, that's a bit weird. But anyway. Meanwhile, do you know anything about that one?
Pardon?
I read. Okay, so there's a couple of things that. Do you know of Immanuel Velikovsky?
Not really, no.
All right. Okay, so I'm not going to bother with that. So we won't go there. But I'm still, you know, the whole process is breaking through the conscious barrier of what is conscious, what is not conscious, until we have continuity of consciousness. Right. So my feeling is that, you know, eventually we'll be able to remember everything about our continuous lives, including our dream world, which at the moment is so ephemeral. You know, you wake up in the morning and somebody says you like a cup of tea and like, oh, there was a dream, and it's gone. This is my feeling of how our minds are going to evolve. What's your feeling on that?
The mind's going to evolve through what?
Continuity of consciousness. That means that when you wake up in the morning, you don't forget your dreams, you remember them. You remember everything that's happened. It's like we lose the amnesia that has been brought upon us, and we become awake.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying earlier, what Jung called the symbolic life and individuation, you know, being true to yourself. And that's the Aboriginal dream time. So really, the Aboriginal, in ancient Greece, the district or area or county called Attica, and the capital of Attica was Athens, and that was the kind of hub of like the Platonic philosophy, the classical period of Greece. And the Aboriginal king was a serpent. So the Aboriginal king was a serpent, and the Aboriginal king in India was a serpent. So you might say the serpent initiated Eve into the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which I interpret as the pomegranate, which is the apple of Venus, and so you might say, you know, we have fear of snakes, that kind of thing, and maybe in dreams as well. I mean, I've been bitten by a snake in the dream, and when I was bitten by a snake in the dream, that was kind of coincidence with the fact that I also had a stroke. So I had this stroke in 2001, and it just revolutionized my life. I was reading Jung, and I was reading the chapter on individuation, and this lady that he was analyzing, she did a series of pictures, I was looking at the picture, and I got vertigo. I experienced this vertigo, dizzy, terrible, really dizzy. And it's almost like a hissing sound. I couldn't hear the hissing sound. It was almost like something hissing, if you puncture a tire or something.
Like white noise.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always had problems all my life with vertigo, so I can't go on things that spin around. I don't like smoke in a car. There's something that just triggers this vertigo. I believe that is something I was born with, maybe from another life. But so I had memory problems, I had coordination problems, and so forth. And I was 55, something like that. And I always, throughout my life, always had a sense of well-being. No matter what happened to me, emotionally, psychologically, in the outside world, I'd recover within a few hours or by the next day. It's very buoyant. If somebody pushed me under the water, I'd bob right up. I felt my well-being was absolutely always there as a kind of safeguard. I always had that inner security, and that was taken away. And when the carpet's pulled from under your thing, and I said to my friend, I'm going right into the pit, I'm going right into the pit. And I actually did go into the pit. I actually hit rock bottom, and I'm now coming out of the pit, and I liken that to the light at the end of the tunnel. I think that you're saying the dark night of the soul. They're the hours of the night in the underworld, and you're looking for the light. And you see a light in the sky, it's a UFO. So you could say the future of humanity is extraterrestrial. That's what the scientists might believe, and that's what some of the spiritual people might believe. And if you think of the UFO as interdimensional, psychophysically, so it can appear and disappear, so it could be from another planet, another dimension. And again, you might say there are many universes, there are many dimensions, but there might be other things as well. There might be other futures that we can't know with our organization. We can't perceive what those other things are. So I think that, for example, when Buddha went into nirvana, and his friends who were ascetics and his family asked him about, well, where is he? He's in nirvana, where is he? And he said, I don't deal with metaphysics. I can't tell you. I don't deal with metaphysics. And then you've got the Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, those who know do not tell, those who tell do not know. So I suggest that there are places that we can't know. It's like you're taken somewhere, you come back, and you don't know where you've been, and you can't translate that. So you might say, in the religious books and in the scientific books, they have these projections. But there must be other things as well. There are other things as well. And maybe there's other things, I'm saying things, but maybe they're going on in your life, my life, and there are new kind of departures, or there are new ways of looking that might be known to other types of beings. And that's I'd like to give you, can I say what's happened recently? Because it would help me.
Absolutely. We like the most up to date.
Right, so you're my shrink. So I finished my books, the 9 books, which is, I conceive that as the Ennead of Heliopolis, the company of 9, the Ennead. And when the Ennead are kind of, you've got the fixed stars, which is the 8, the infinity sign, the fixed stars, the infinite universe. Then you have an invisible kind of background, which is the Ennead. So you have a kind of invisible background. So you could say, like, there's an invisible background to the quantum field, there's an invisible background to the Big Bang, there's an invisible background to concepts of dimensions. So there's a kind of invisible background. So I closed my book on 50 years of spiritual investigation, and I'm just new, I'm like a child. I don't know what's next. And so I start to approach people like yourself, and Kerry Cassidy responded quite quickly, and 2 nights before, I sent her an email and no response. So I have a dream of this blonde lady. This blonde lady comes close to me, is very affectionate, and I think, and it's said that she's from California, and I think of Marilyn Monroe. That's the only kind of, type I could think. 2 days later, I think I'm going to Skype Kerry Cassidy, and I thought, no, sending emails is one thing, but Skyping, I felt that was a bit intrusive. It's quite personal. I just had this feeling it was very intrusive to do that, but somehow I had to do it, and she responded, and I went on Project Camelot. But I didn't connect her to the dream with the the blonde lady in California. I just didn't connect it. And so I had that interview. Then the same thing happened. I emailed Miles Johnson, Basis Project, and no response. So I thought I spontaneously decided to contact him by Skype. But what happened was that a few nights before, I went to lie down. I lied down in bed with my eyes closed, and a head appeared in front of me, in my mind's eye. It was a kind of parchment yellow head, just to my right, very close. And it had angular features, like a snake or a lizard. It had a slightly angular kind of head. And it had a very small eye. The right eye was close to my right eye, and that was that. And then 2 nights later, the same figure was in full size, in the same situation, full size, and it leant over me and put its head right next to my head. So it leant right over, put its head right next to my head. And I decided to Skype Miles Johnston, and he responded right away, and he wanted to record right away. And I go onto his I do 2 parts, about 2 hours and a half, and we're going through the interview, and I start making mistakes. I start actually making mistakes. So I say that Jung's born in 1875, and he starts the Red Book, the famous Red Book that's just come out. His Red Book, his book of visions, his book of meeting entities. And I said, he began in 1812. And then I made another mistake. I said, instead of Poughkeepsie in New York, I said Portsmouth. And I thought, this was not me. This is definitely not me. And then I told this story where I was in Banbury. I got picked up in a green minivan by this long-bearded, long-haired, kind of bohemian type. He wasn't strictly a hippie. He was older. He was 60 and I was 25. I was going to India. And he took me around Oxford where I was actually brought up. And he said, one day I want to come back here and be buried. Anyway, we carried on, and we go to through London. He said, would you like to stay the night with me? I said, fine. I was on my way hitching to India. And, we go into this like fantastic estate with a Spanish villa, mazes and everything like that. And we go in there, and of course it's not his house. I mean, he's quite rough. But he said, would you like to meet the owner? And it turned out to be Eric Clapton. And so I spent the night in Eric Clapton's house in 1970. And I told the story in the first part, and then the second part, I told it again. And I couldn't believe it when Miles Johnston said, you've said that before. And I thought, something's radically wrong. This is not me, this is definitely not me. It's never happened before. And I said, and then it went on the conversation, and he's got a way of kind of pushing you. He kind of keeps on saying, you're dancing around the handbag. That's what he said. You're dancing around the handbag. You're trying to get somewhere. But of course, that kind of interrogation, I'm not used to that. People don't talk to me like that. And I knew that he could do that, and I was hoping that he would push me into a certain place in myself. So it went on, and I said to him, you're pushing me, this is very, very weird. And I was really experiencing a very weird state of mind, and it got weirder and weirder and weirder. And he was saying all these very strange things that he had heard about. And so his orientation was completely different from me. What he was saying was not in kind of sync with what I was saying. And I said, Miles, this is very end of the interview, I said, Miles, that, this is like way out. This is like way out. Something radical is happening to me. I'm getting a massive download of my dreams last night, which involve you. And he was talking about this Jewish group, and he was linking them to the Nephilim, and he was linking them to the Nephilim, and they were trying to control humanity, and I hadn't heard of that. So it was like this kind of like subtext going on that was doing something to me, this information. And I said, I'm getting this massive download, and I've never had a download, and this massive download, layers and layers and layers, almost like a Bible. Like I said, I used the word Bible, this download of like dreams. And then it got even more incredible. I was getting a download right then from somewhere else as I was speaking to him. So there's these two downloads. There was one that happened the night before, and the only image I remember from the night before was me with him, or with a person, I assume it's him, and he was telling me things. He was sitting next to me telling me things, and this was before I even Skyped him. Just like happened with Carrie Cassidy, somebody affectionately close to me, and also the figure bending over me, putting his head next to me as if he was downloading. So the reptilian was downloading into me before the dreams, and then I as I say, the download was happening from the dreams. The download was happening, and I said, I was really freaked out. I was almost in tears, and I said, you've done it. You broke through. He revealed to me. And what I was seeing while I was sitting, Skyping with him, I was seeing, like, if you imagine pages of a book quickly flicking over, I was kind of reading this script. It wasn't hieroglyphs, it was like images, like a life review, but it was like images going. And I knew that was me. I was looking at my story, but it wasn't me talking to you now. It wasn't me in this life. It wasn't me in this dimension, but I knew this other, that was me in somewhere else, and it was like downloading at such a speed, and I was managing to read a couple of lines, as it were, and at the end of the interview, I was just totally in ecstasy. I was in this kind of absolute ecstasy, and I said, "You've done it. You've done it." I woke up the next morning, I can't remember a single thing about the dream download and about the other downloads. It's as if it never happened, and yet I said to him, it's the most important thing that's ever happened to me.
That really sucks, doesn't it? So, well, like I say, one day you'll remember it. So,
yeah.
So, it begs the question now, David, did you have any dreams last night about this evening? Or is this completely unexpected?
No, I don't have any memory of dreams last night. I don't have any memory, no. No, it's like a blank. And what I noticed, when I looked in the mirror, I noticed that my eyes were shining. There was a kind of shine in my eyes after that experience. And I've noticed that, when I actually watched the video, I saw my face changing, like it was like changing. And, definitely like, I was recognizable to myself, but something has changed, but I'm seeing little bits of things, but it's almost like, I forget the word, like, the Transfiguration idea.
Where the pineal gland lights up and the eyes glow.
Where your face, it's like like Christ, didn't he? He went up to the mountain and transfigured in front of his disciples.
Oh, that one.
His face shone as the sun. But the point is that, we've got, if something from another dimension, me in another dimension, or another past life or a different timeline, however you want to look at it, that the way I look there may be blending with the way I look now. So something of the way I look there, just like when I was in my 50s, I could see my mother and my father appearing in my face. And my mother, more or less, her personality, she was introvert, she took over, her aspect, her character took over for many, many years. And now my father, who's an extrovert, he was an entertainer, I need his help to talk to you and go out on the stage of life, the theatre, because that is not the way I am. That's not the kind of person I am. But I need my father's help to go out on the stage. So I'm saying that download from some other me in another dimension, me in another timeline, me in another thing, it's like maybe that the way I look there is coming into this. Just like the reptilian, like Simon Park says, he's part reptilian, part mantis. That's what I'm actually saying, because I can see the mantis very clearly in Simon Park's, for example. And I think that, I've had an experience of a reptilian that was like my double. So I've had an experience of me waking up in the middle of the night in an out of the body state, looking down at my body, and lying above my body, it was a reptile. And you see pictures of Satan, the devil, with the tail and everything, all the scales. Well, that's what it was like. But it was very beautiful, because I like animals, and it was very beautiful. And it was just lying above me. Now, if for example, if I was told by somebody that in another dimension I am a reptile, I find that a bit freaky. But as I'm getting used to the UFO community and entities, I'm kind of becoming more adaptable to that idea that in another timeline, another dimension, another planet or something, you might be reptile-like, which would have freaked me out quite a while ago. I don't know what you feel about that. That's what I meant. There's some other look in my face coming in.
Well, there's several ideas that it could be. Another is that when you meet somebody from a past life,
Yeah.
they carry an impression of you, etherically and oracally, and when you meet, you exchange those impressions. It's like a backup, almost, of who you were, a vibrational backup. And so it may be possible that you knew Miles in a past life, and so that exchange was going on. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's quite possible. That is quite possible. Yeah, that's a good one, because my best friend of 30 years, Professor Roderick Main, who's a world scholar on Jung and synchronicity, I met him while he was doing classics at Oxford. But actually what happened was that while I was listening to a talk by Krishnamurti in Brockwood Park in the Marquee in Hampshire, in the year before he died in 1985, I was standing. I knew the principal, Dorothy Simmons, of the school. I used to visit there, and I was standing just near her, and I didn't like to sit down in all the crowd. There's 1,500 people. So I noticed these two people, these like young men. I was probably 30 something. And they were sitting together, and I thought, oh, maybe they're brothers, but I couldn't see their face. I just saw the head. And I just saw the head of this person. I thought, God, I just had the thought, he's very intelligent, this person, very intelligent. And I'm not sure, I think I probably got a glimpse of his face. I must have got a glimpse of his face, but I didn't communicate with him. So I go back to Oxford, and I'm in Jericho, near North Oxford. I'm standing at the window looking out, and this person rides by on a bike, and it's him, this like younger man. At the time, I give a workshop with the person that runs the Rudolf Steiner Center. He's a kind of aristocratic man in Oxford. He was my friend at the time. And I'm giving a workshop in the Friends Meeting House on consciousness, and I'm walking down the high street with posters, and then I see this young man, and I said, why didn't you, I saw you at Brockwood Park, why didn't you come along, to the meeting? And he turns up, and he becomes my friend of 30 years. So I think of what like you just said, something was going on. So something's going on, some kind of recognition of like, something you share, there's some link. It might be your two artists in like two pre-Raphaelites or something like that. So there's some kind of link, the link. And it turns out probably the link is something mythological. He was a classicist. I'm very connected to philosophy. I did philosophy, and it goes back to ancient Greece. And I wrote a book in 2 parts, and one of the parts was called The Slave's Life, and I centered it in ancient Greece, and it was about a young man who's initiated more or less into the mysteries. And while I had the Kerry Cassidy interview, she said that what I was telling her seemed to be like a past life. When I was saying about Greece and such, and the philosophy, and the fact that I ended up studying philosophy, because when I grew up, I was fairly mediocre in school. And then suddenly, when I went to university, I became top in philosophy. It was like just the light went on. And so that kind of thing where, were we friends, in ancient Greece, in philosophy, it's highly likely.
So, and that's what friends do for each other, isn't it? Help each other remember through the past lives. And it could even be part of a plan. For instance, that's the plan of, oh God, what was his name? 15th century Buddhist leader, yellow hats, Tsongkhapa, that's his name. He, you know, what I was told is the Dark Lodge produces, Siddha powers, and the White Lodge produces, tukus and reincarnates and people who remember their incarnations. Like I say, to remember the continuity of consciousness. And so they have groups of 3, or more, but usually groups of 3. And we see this during the recognition of certain, lamas, like the Panchen Lama and all of that, where they go around and, you know, the guy says, in a few weeks I'm going to leave my body, and in about 4 years time you'll find me on this road with this, with this street lamp, and, you know, the family will be happy to give me up to the monastery and everything, and it'll be cool. So they, you know, they go and collect him, and they're, you know, everything is as he says. So I don't know where you'd like to go with that kind of seed idea.
When I was in Lancaster and my friend Roderick was doing his PhD in the religious department at Lancaster University, he found a post at the University of Essex. I said to him, you know, I envision my future, you know, the next step type of thing, as meeting somebody and going into their house, and in the house they would have objects in the front room that were distinctly related to me. So we come here, I meet this old man, and I base my trilogy, The Luminary is Coming, on this. The first book's about meeting this wise old man. And I met him, and he told me a story about Iris, the goddess of the rainbow, and the Greek goddess. And I didn't know much about mythology, so I go home and look up in Serlo's Dictionary of Symbols that my friend had, and I'm reading about Iris, and the radio's on Classical Music Radio 3. The news comes on and says that the famous Oxford philosopher novelist Iris Murdoch died. And I lived with my friend in Celia Green's Institute, more or less next door to Iris Murdoch. So I thought, wow, this is a real connection. And I got to know the old man. He taught me the wildflowers down the river. And, you know, I go into his house, and he's got a big picture of Constable on the wall. And this is Constable country. You know, it's near Dedham, where he was born, in the Suffolk border with Essex. And then he had some images of kingfishers. He had several images of kingfishers, and which relate to the Fisher King, the Grail kind of idea, which I was interested in. Constable was always my favourite landscape. And then he had a papyrus of some Egyptian deities. Now this man had not read any formal books whatsoever, wasn't religious, and yet he had this papyrus. And then he took out some photographs and showed me a picture of a UFO that he had taken. This man was about 82, a greengrocer all his life, and yet he had this UFO picture of a green UFO. And then he brings out this stone, this red granite, and it turns out that this red granite came from the base of Cleopatra's Needle when it was in Alexander. So his grandfather was a merchant in the merchant navy, and he was on the ship that brought Cleopatra's Needle from Alexander to the Thames Embankment in London. Now, this red stone links in directly with a vision I had of this figure with the golden mask and the big black oval eyes, the alien eyes, and he gave me a red cube, and just before the vision, I had an image of my grandfather's name is Garnet, and then it turns out that the Garnet is a red cube, and that's through further research. And so the idea that he had this UFO picture, had Constable, had the kingfishers, had the redstone, and that was the central motif that I was carrying with me about my family bloodline, and it's the third eye. So that's the kind of thing, this kind of sense of seeing into the future, of precognition, and then the whole thing unfolding. And it goes on and on and on. I mean, it just went on and on and on. And that's what filled the book. I mean, 500 pages.
Wow, and it just pours out.
Yeah.
So like I say, we think we're making stuff up, yet it really does seem to be a real thing coming from somewhere else. Is there anything that is just made up? Or is everything from somewhere? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a matter of perspective, isn't it? Holographically. You're seeing the same thing, but you're seeing something quite different. I feel that if you take reality as the word reality, which you could say is synonymous with everything, just everything in extension, everything that is, wherever you are, wherever you go. The idea of the one, the one is like a circle, but it's nothing. In the sense the circle could contain everything, and yet it's nothing. When you enter nirvana, it's called the one mind, and Thoth, who's the Egyptian, the highest principle in Egypt, is known as the one, and then you have the Platonic one. So you could say that if you're in nirvana, and I was saying about Eric Clapton, well, Eric Clapton was in the Cream, and the Cream's the track on their album, the first track is The White Room. When I mentioned that to Miles Johnson, he said that many people are coming forward about The White Room, and that appeared several times in my interview. I said about the White Room appearing, and I suggested that when you enter nirvana, because it's nothing, shunyata, it's empty, it's the white light, it's the clear light of the one mind. And I thought that could be the archetypal white room, because Buddha said he didn't want to say where he was, and he couldn't say where he was because he was in the white room, so that from that perspective, if when you're individuated and you're whole and one, if you reach that goal of one, which I don't think Jung actually achieved, he achieved the level of perfection, he achieved the visionary level. You have the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and you have Nirvana, so you have the three bodies. So if you're in, say, where Buddha was, wherever he was, the one, if you take the one circle, nothing, naught, then what is reality? What is reality from that perspective? So if you go into the white room, then from that perspective, what is reality as we know it? What is reality in terms of content, for example? Because in the white room, in nirvana, there's no conditions. You're supposed to be free of conditions. So that means to say, wherever you go in reality, if you're enlightened in the Buddhist sense, and you go to any dimension, any universe, any planet, anywhere, then if you're always one, what is your perspective? What's your relationship to things? If you take things as being things of reality, what is your perspective? And I find that I think that is really the model I go by. I go by the concept of the one. But when they say about the law, David Wilcox, etc., goes on about the law of the one, really is the proper thing to say, because it's an Egyptian concept, is the law of Ma'at. The one, you've got the one who's Thoth, he's the Masonic grand architect of the universe. He's the one outside of the universe. If you take the universe as, say, the model of reality as we know it, so, in the scientific sense or in the experiential sense, so he's outside of that. He's the Lord of the law of Ma'at. So he's the Lord of the cosmic order and the world order, Ma'at, and she's his consort or mate. So I would say, instead of the law of one, you could say the law of Ma'at. So I would say that when I've entered Satori, which is a kind of the Zen enlightenment, which I wrote about in my book, The One Mind, I was in this state for 3 months here in this room, and I kept a journal every day. I kept a record of it every day, and I wrote down what I was experiencing. And I'll give you an example. I'm on my daily walk, which is about 5 miles, takes me about less than 2 hours. I stop all the time. I'm walking past the cricket pitch. There are some poplar trees, some tall poplar, Lombardy poplar trees. I'm looking through the poplar trees across the playing field, which is quite big. It's a big square lined by trees, massive square. And, I walk every day, I'm looking through the trees and I see the sky. It's very open, very big space. So when I'm in this Satori and I'm walking along and I look through the trees, it's not the space you see with your eyes. It's not the normal space. The space it's space, but it's not space as we, as the scientists know it. It's not time and space. It's not time and space. It's not the physical space. It's so immense. The space is so absolute. And it's so powerful, the experience of it. But because I was kind of in that state for 3 months, I could look and not be shocked. But what I'm saying is, from a certain perspective, nothing is what you like Jordan Maxwell said, nothing is what you think it is.
That would be a nice place.
I think that's, I came out of that state, as it were, but I wasn't in the transcendental nirvana, the white room. I was in the immanent. I was still, how I experienced it was, while sitting here looking at the castle when it first happened, what happened, I had an awareness of my head, and consciousness was like a pinpoint. It kind of like contracted into a pinpoint to the left, on the left side of my head, as if the memory enfolded, like a book. It just enfolded. So there was just a tiny attachment to my identity. So I knew who I was sitting here, but in a sense I didn't know, because the Satori took over. It was like 95% Satori and 5% me, consciousness. So I walked around, and how I experienced it, first of all, was that my attention, because Castaneda goes into the idea of the, I forget the name,
David?
Appendage. Yes?
I'm afraid we're right out of time. I was hoping to jump in at an appropriate moment, but we should see how this comes out in the future. David Curtis, thank you very much. Do you have a website people can visit, or email?
Yes, I'll give my email.
Okay.
David.sr.curtis@outlook.com. And you can find me on Facebook and Amazon, and my email address is there as well.
David Curtis, thank you very much. Good night. This was Ever Beyond Radio. Beyond, 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 beyond.